I never thought my entire life would implode over a snowstorm in Buffalo, New York. But here I was, standing in front of a judge explaining why I'd buried the HOA clubhouse entrance under 6 feet of snow. My name is Aaron Edwards, and I'm a 34-year-old software developer who works from home. I bought my 3-bedroom colonial in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision 3 years ago, thinking I'd found the perfect quiet neighborhood to settle down in. The house had good bones, a solid roof, and a backyard big enough for my German Shepherd, Duke. What I didn't realize was that the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association would become the bane of my entire existence. The trouble started on a freezing Tuesday morning in January. Buffalo had just been slammed with one of the worst snowstorms we'd seen in years. 23 inches fell overnight, and the entire city looked like someone had dumped powdered sugar over everything. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching Duke chase snowflakes through the window, when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Patricia Winters standing on my porch, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Patricia was the HOA president, a 47-year-old woman with highlighted blonde hair that never moved, even in the bitter wind that was currently whipping around us. She wore a puffy North Face jacket and boots that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Aaron," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the howling wind, "we need to talk about your responsibilities." I blinked at her, confused. "My responsibilities? Patricia, it's 7 in the morning and we just got hit with 2 feet of snow. Can this wait?" "No, it cannot wait." She thrust a piece of paper at me. According to Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws, all homeowners are required to assist with community maintenance during emergency weather situations. I took the paper, my fingers already going numb from the cold. "What are you talking about?" "I shoveled my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house last night." "I'm not talking about your property," Patricia said, her lips pursed so tight they'd practically disappeared. "I'm talking about the community parking lot adjacent to the clubhouse. As you know, we've had to let our maintenance contractor go due to budget constraints." That was news to me, but it didn't surprise me. The HOA had been nickel and diming everyone for years, while Patricia and her cronies voted themselves raises for their volunteer work. "Okay," I said slowly. "But what does that have to do with me?" "The parking lot needs to be cleared immediately. We have an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for this evening to discuss snow removal assessments, and we need access to the clubhouse." I stared at her. "You want me to shovel the entire parking lot?" "Not shovel," Patricia corrected. "You have a truck with a plow attachment, don't you? I've seen it in your driveway." She wasn't wrong. I did have a F-250 with a plow blade that I'd bought used last year. I used it to make extra money on the side, plowing driveways for elderly neighbors and small businesses around Buffalo. But that was my business, my equipment, and my time. "Patricia, I use that for my plowing business. I charge for that service." Her eyes narrowed. "This is a community responsibility, Aaron. We all have to pitch in during times of crisis. Besides, you're saving money by not having to pay for a professional service." "But I am a professional service," I said, my patience wearing thin. "And I have 12 clients waiting for me to clear their properties today. I can't just drop everything to plow the HOA parking lot for free." Patricia's face turned red. "This is not a request, Aaron. This is a requirement under the bylaws. If you refuse, you'll be fined $500 per day until the parking lot is cleared." "That's insane," I said. "You can't just make up fines like that." "Read the bylaws," she snapped. Section 14, Paragraph 3, Subsection B, Emergency Maintenance Requirements with Penalty Provisions. You agreed to these terms when you purchased your home. She turned on her heel and marched back down my unshoveled front steps, nearly slipping on the ice. I watched her climb into her pristine white Lexus SUV and drive away, her tires crunching through the fresh snow. I stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through my thermal shirt, and read the paper she'd given me. Sure enough, buried in the dense legal language was a provision that stated homeowners could be called upon to assist with emergency maintenance. The language was vague enough that Patricia could probably twist it to mean whatever she wanted. I went back inside, my coffee now cold, and called my neighbor Steve Martinez. Steve was a lawyer who specialized in property law, and he lived 4 houses down from me. "Steve, it's Aaron." "You got a minute?" "Make it quick," Steve said. "I'm trying to dig my car out so I can get to the office." I explained the situation, reading him the relevant section of the bylaws. I could hear him tapping on his computer keyboard in the background. "Okay, I'm looking at the Meadowbrook Heights HOA bylaws now," Steve said. "The provision Patricia cited does exist, but it's pretty loosely written. The problem is that it doesn't clearly define what constitutes an emergency or what reasonable assistance means. A judge could interpret it either way. So she can force me to plow the parking lot. She can try," Steve said. "But the $500 per day fine is excessive and probably wouldn't hold up in court. However, taking her to court would cost you more in legal fees than just plowing the stupid parking lot. That's what HOAs bank on. They know most people won't fight them because it's not worth the hassle." I thanked Steve and hung up, frustration bubbling in my chest. This was exactly the kind of petty tyranny that made HOAs so despised. Patricia knew she was being unreasonable, but she didn't care. She had the bylaws on her side, or at least a twisted interpretation of them, and she knew I couldn't afford to fight her in court. I spent the next hour plowing my regular clients' driveways, my mind churning the entire time. By noon, I'd made $800, and my phone was ringing off the hook with more requests. The storm had created a plowing bonanza, and I was losing money every minute I wasn't working. But Patricia's threat hung over my head like a guillotine blade. $500 per day added up fast. If she followed through with the fines, I'd be looking at thousands of dollars in penalties before this could get resolved. At 1 o'clock, I drove past the HOA clubhouse to survey the situation. The parking lot was a mess, a pristine white blanket of snow covering about 40 parking spaces. It would take me at least 2 hours to clear it properly, time I couldn't afford to waste. That's when I noticed something interesting. The clubhouse entrance had a long, covered walkway that jutted out from the main building. The walkway created a natural corridor between the building and the parking lot, with decorative shrubs and lampposts on either side. If I was going to plow the parking lot, I'd have to push the snow somewhere. Usually, proper snow removal meant pushing snow to the edges of a lot, creating neat piles that wouldn't obstruct traffic or parking spaces. But I was feeling anything but charitable toward Patricia and her power-tripping board members. I pulled into the parking lot and dropped my plow blade. The hydraulics hissed as the blade scraped against the frozen asphalt. I started at the far end of the lot, pushing long rows of snow toward the clubhouse. With each pass, I created a massive white wave that rolled ahead of my truck. Instead of pushing the snow to the sides of the lot, I aimed directly for the clubhouse entrance. The walkway became my target, and with methodical precision I began creating a massive snow berm right in front of the main doors. Push after push, the pile grew higher. 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. I backed up and took another run, ramming the snow pile harder, packing it down and pushing it higher. The decorative shrubs disappeared under the white mass. The lampposts became isolated islands poking out of a frozen sea. By the time I finished, the parking lot was completely clear, every parking space visible and accessible. But the clubhouse entrance was buried under a wall of snow that had to be at least 6 feet high and 10 feet deep. There was no way anyone was getting through those doors without a front-end loader. I sat in my truck for a moment, admiring my work. Technically, I'd done exactly what Patricia had demanded. I'd cleared the parking lot. She hadn't specified where to put the snow. My phone rang. It was Patricia. "What have you done?" she shrieked before I could even say hello. "I just got a call from Margaret Chen. She drove by the clubhouse and said you've blocked the entrance with snow." "I cleared the parking lot like you asked," I said calmly. "The snow had to go somewhere. You did this on purpose. You deliberately blocked the entrance." "I completed the emergency maintenance you required," I said. Section 14, Paragraph 3 states that homeowners must assist with community maintenance. It doesn't specify the methods to be used. The parking lot is clear and accessible. Patricia made a sound like a tea kettle about to explode. "You're going to clear that entrance right now, or I'm calling the police." "For what?" "I provided the service you demanded. If you want additional work done, you'll need to pay my standard rate. That's $300 per hour with a 2-hour minimum." "I will see you fined into bankruptcy," Patricia screamed. "The board will hear about this." She hung up. I drove away, feeling a grim satisfaction. I knew I'd probably made things worse for myself, but I was tired of being pushed around by an HOA president on a power trip. I spent the rest of the afternoon finishing my regular plowing jobs. By 6 o'clock, I'd made another $1,000, and my phone was still ringing with requests. The storm had been a financial windfall, and I went home exhausted but pleased with my day's work. That evening, Duke and I were sprawled on the couch watching a Sabres game when my doorbell rang again. This time, it was the police. 2 Buffalo PD officers stood on my porch, their faces neutral and professional. "Aaron Edwards?" the first officer asked. "That's me." "We received a complaint about malicious property damage at the Meadowbrook Heights clubhouse. A Patricia Winters claims you deliberately blocked the entrance with snow." I invited them inside and explained the entire situation, showing them Patricia's written demand that I clear the parking lot and the HOA bylaws she'd cited. I pulled up photos on my phone showing the cleared parking lot. "So she demanded you clear the lot, you did, and now she's mad about where you put the snow?" the second officer asked. "That's about the size of it," I said. The officers looked at each other. The first one shrugged. "This sounds like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter." "You didn't damage any property, you just moved snow. We'll file a report, but I don't see any charges here." "Patricia said I committed malicious property damage," I said. "Snow isn't property damage," the second officer said. "It's snow. It'll melt eventually. If she wants it moved sooner, she can hire someone. We're not getting involved in HOA drama." They left, and I felt a small surge of relief. At least I wasn't being arrested. But I knew Patricia wasn't done. She was the type to hold grudges, and I just humiliated her in front of the entire board. The next morning, I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my front door. It was a formal notice of violation from the HOA, citing me for willful destruction of community property, failure to comply with maintenance standards, and conduct unbecoming a member of the Meadowbrook Heights community. The fines totaled $2,000, due immediately. I called Steve again. "They're really going after you," Steve said after I read him the violation notice. "This is harassment, plain and simple. But here's the problem. Fighting this will require you to request a hearing with the HOA board, which Patricia controls. If that doesn't work, you'll have to take them to court, which means legal fees." How much are we talking? For something like this? Probably $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how long it drags out, and that's assuming you win. I felt sick. So I'm screwed either way. Pay their bogus fines or spend even more fighting them. There might be another option, Steve said. Let me make some calls. I know a few people who specialize in HOA disputes. Sit tight and don't do anything stupid. I promised I wouldn't, but the anger was building inside me like pressure in a boiler. That afternoon, 3 more certified letters arrived, each one containing additional fines for various alleged violations. My grass was too long in October. My trash cans had been visible from the street on a non-collection day. My Christmas lights had been up 2 days past the HOA's designated removal date. Patricia was going through the archives and digging up every petty violation she could find. The fines now totaled over $5,000. I drove to Steve's house and showed him the letters. He looked them over, his expression growing darker. "This is retaliation, clear as day," Steve said. "Most of these violations are beyond the statute of limitations for HOA enforcement, and the fines are excessive." "Aaron, I think we need to fight this." "I can't afford it," I said. "I'll represent you pro bono," Steve said. "This pisses me off. Patricia's been abusing her power for years, but she's finally gone too far. We'll request a hearing with the board, and when that inevitably fails, we'll file a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of authority. We might even be able to get a judge to invalidate some of these stupid bylaws." Hope flickered in my chest. "You'd really do that?" "I'm a member of this HOA too," Steve said. "And I'm sick of Patricia's games. Let's take her down." The HOA hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening at the Clubhouse. By then, someone had finally cleared the snow from the entrance. I suspected Patricia had hired a professional service, which probably cost the HOA several $100s. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived at the Clubhouse at 7 o'clock sharp with Steve at my side. The meeting room was set up like a courtroom, with Patricia and 4 other board members sitting at a long table at the front. About 20 other homeowners were scattered in the folding chairs, drawn by the drama. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "We're here tonight to address multiple violations by homeowner Aaron Edwards. Mr. Edwards, you have the right to present your defense." Steve stood up. "I'm representing Mr. Edwards. Before we begin, I'd like to note for the record that this hearing appears to be retaliatory in nature. My client was threatened with fines for refusing to provide free labor, and only after he complied with the HOA's demands in a manner the president didn't approve of were these historical violations suddenly discovered." Margaret Chen, the board secretary, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was a petite woman in her 60s who'd always struck me as reasonable. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Martinez." "It's the truth," Steve said. He laid out the timeline of events, from Patricia's initial demand to the stack of violation notices. The HOA president abused her authority to compel my client to provide free professional services, then retaliated when he complied in a way she didn't like. This is textbook harassment. Patricia's face turned red. "The bylaws clearly state, the bylaws don't give you the right to demand free labor from homeowners," Steve interrupted. "And they certainly don't give you the right to dig up months-old violations to punish someone who didn't bow to your demands. I've reviewed every notice my client received, and most of them are beyond the enforcement period specified in the bylaws. The grass violation from October. The bylaws state that violations must be addressed within 30 days. It's now January." One of the other board members, a heavy-set man named Robert Palmer, leaned forward. "Is that true, Patricia? Are these violations outside the enforcement window? Patricia shuffled her papers. The bylaws allow for enforcement of ongoing violations. But these aren't ongoing violations, Steve said. My client's grass hasn't been too long since October when he mowed it for the last time before winter. His Christmas lights have been down for weeks. These are historical violations that the HOA chose to ignore until it became convenient to use them as weapons. The room buzzed with conversation. I could see several homeowners nodding along with Steve's arguments. Patricia had made a lot of enemies over the years, and people were clearly enjoying watching her squirm. Fine, Patricia snapped. We'll table the historical violations, but the parking lot incident is still valid. Mr. Edwards deliberately blocked the clubhouse entrance, preventing the board from conducting official business. My client cleared the parking lot as demanded, Steve said. Where he placed the snow is irrelevant. The HOA's demand didn't specify snow placement protocols. If you wanted the snow placed in a specific location, you should have hired a professional service and paid for it like any other business would. Margaret Chen raised her hand. Patricia, can I ask a question? Why did we demand that Aaron clear the parking lot for free when he runs a professional plowing service? Patricia's jaw clenched. Because the bylaws state that homeowners must assist with emergency maintenance. But that provision is meant for things like sandbagging during a flood or clearing fallen trees after a storm, Margaret said. Community efforts where everyone pitches in. It's not meant to compel homeowners to provide professional services for free. That seems like an abuse of the bylaw. I agree, Robert said. I'm a contractor. If the HOA demanded I repair the clubhouse roof for free and threatened to fine me if I refused, I'd be furious. This doesn't seem right. Patricia looked around the table and realized she was losing support. This matter requires further review, she said stiffly. I'm calling for a motion to table this hearing until next month. I don't think so, Steve said. You called this hearing, you issued the fines, and now you want to table it because you know you're wrong. I move that the board vote.